Hello, everyone. On behalf of AAE board member and Director of Professional Development, Alicia Scott, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Thank you for joining us for today's topic, Ready on Day One, How to Find Teacher Prep Programs that are Getting Reading Instruction Right. My name is Tim Newbert, and I serve as AAE's Executive Director. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to AAE members as well as non-members who registered. Attendees are encouraged to post any questions, comments, or feedback using the Q&A or chat features within Zoom. If you or your organization do not yet have AAE membership, please visit our website, aaee.org, to learn more about our activities and resources. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with the preparation, recruitment, and retention of pre-K-12 educators: university professionals and others who prepare and support educators, school system professionals and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. We co-host the careersforeducators.com job board with Kappa Delta Pi. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. With support from Proximity Learning and Bench K-12 respectively, we sponsor scholarships for future teachers and mini grants for school systems and nonprofits to encourage and support educator pipelines. In collaboration with Upbeat, we co-host an annual national working group on teacher retention, and we host an annual conference and education career expo each fall. Our 2023 event will be held on October 23rd through 26th in Chicago, Illinois. Check out our website to learn more. Joining me today are Putman, and Christie Ellis from the National Council on Teacher Quality. Hannah is NCTQ's Managing Director of Research. She ensures that the organization's analysis is grounded in a strong research basis and methodology, and her work includes analyzing the teacher pipeline and licensure standards and evaluating teacher preparation in areas including content knowledge and classroom management. Hannah comes to NCTQ after conducting education research with Westat, a social science research company. Previously, Hannah taught 7th and 9th grade English. Hannah holds BAs in English and Government and Politics from the University of Maryland, an MS in Teaching from Pace University, and an MPP from the George Washington University with a focus on education policy and evaluation. Christie Ellis serves as a director with NCTQ, supporting special programs, including the Teacher Prep Review. She came to NCTQ after 4 years as a 3rd grade English language arts teacher. Christie holds a MS in educational studies from Johns Hopkins University and a BA in anthropology and cognitive science from Case Western Reserve University. Thank you all for being here today. Hannah and Christie, I'll now turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We are so excited to be here with you to discuss how you can use our data to inform decisions about where to recruit new teachers from. We'll focus on our findings from a recently released report, Reading Foundations for the Teacher Prep Review, but we'll also share some highlights from past editions of the Teacher Prep Review on other relevant topics. All of this data is publicly available, and we'll share with you how you can access data for your state or for other states that you're interested in. If you're not familiar with the National Council on Teacher Quality, NCTQ is a research and policy nonprofit driven by the mission that every child deserves access to effective teachers and every teacher deserves the opportunity to become effective. And we focus our work on the institutions that most affect teachers, states and their policies around areas like evaluation and compensation, district policies, and teacher preparation programs. So as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and agree with, all children deserve the opportunity to learn to read, and all teachers deserve the preparation that allows them to help their students achieve this goal. Giving teachers the knowledge and skills they need to teach reading effectively is fundamental to improve outcomes for all children and to reverse historic patterns of inequity. But as we know from NAEP data and from many other sources, far too many children aren't learning to read, and those rates of reading failure rise for historically marginalized students. This data is a clear measure of systemic inequities and a lack of access to strong reading instruction, and is not the fault of these students. Reading proficiency is starting to rebound after the pandemic, but we have a long way to go to not only reach pre-pandemic literacy rates, but to exceed them. Yet we know how to help more than 90% of children learn to read proficiently with scientifically based reading instruction on phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. NCTQ's past research and research by others has consistently found that teacher prep programs do not adequately prepare aspiring teachers in these core components of reading. But many programs are getting it right. And as school district leaders, you can help recruit teachers from these stronger programs and give feedback to the ones that provide weaker instruction in reading. Doing so is essential to help sustain the policies that many of you are implementing to improve reading instruction in K-12 schools. NCTQ has evaluated the quality of teacher prep programs against a set of research-based standards for well over a decade. We first piloted a reading standard in 2006 and have comprehensively reviewed whether teacher prep programs across the country prepare elementary teachers to teach reading since 2013, using criteria that were designed in partnership with content experts and that aligns with the science of reading. In the last decade, we have seen teacher prep programs improve, often when states implement policies that outline clear expectations for prep programs around the teaching of reading, when they offer support or capacity building, and when they hold programs accountable if they don't meet these expectations. Yet despite these pockets of improvement, far too many programs still do not adequately devote attention to reading, and many still teach instructional practices that run counter to research. So over the last 2 years, we've updated our teacher prep review reading standard based on input from the field. With this revision, we sought to keep pace with changes in the field, to recognize that children's reading proficiency continues to fall short, and to facilitate a transparent, inclusive, and rigorous process. The revision process had 3 key facets. The first was a convening of an expert advisory panel, which included reading researchers, representatives from higher education, practitioners, and reading experts to guide the content of the analysis. The second was a technical advisory group comprised of measurement experts to guide the methodological changes. And the third was a public comment period where we solicited feedback from the field on proposed updates to the standard, which was answered by higher education faculty, district and state leaders, advocacy organizations, and reading researchers. Based in large part on this feedback and a review of the research, we developed a new version of our teacher prep review reading foundation standard. With this standard, we look for evidence of how programs prepare future teachers in 5 components of scientifically based reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And for each of these components, we review course materials for evidence of 4 instructional approaches: instructional hours, or the amount of course time spent covering a topic; objective measures of knowledge, such as tests, quizzes, and graded written assignments; practice opportunities, such as field experiences or experiences administering an assessment; and background materials, including textbooks, articles, or other resources. For each component, a program can earn up to 3 points per instructional approach, for a total of 12 points per component. To be considered adequately addressing a component, a program has to get at least 8 out of 12 points for that component. We also analyze the extent to which programs prepare candidates to teach 3 groups of students: English language learners, struggling readers, and students who speak English language varieties other than mainstream English. In the same way that we look at how programs cover these 5 components, the previous 5 core components, we look at programs' uses of the 4 instructional approaches for these student populations. Through this revision process, we made several substantive changes to the standard. The first was that we increased and differentiated the expectations for how much instructional time programs devote to each of these 5 core components. For example, we look for evidence of at least 8 hours dedicated to phonics, whereas we only look for evidence of 4 hours for fluency. We also review programs for the presence of reading practices contrary to the research, such as the use of miscue analysis or 3-cueing. And we evaluate the requirement for candidates to practice instruction in a component, whereas previously we counted either practice or tests and other assignments. So now we are separately looking for evidence that candidates have to practice individual components of reading instruction. So this is a pretty intensive process with programs. We first reached out to programs for information on the standard, requesting course materials in early 2022 through a voluntary request. Programs were given several months to respond, at which point we sent a public records request to all public institutions, since private institutions are not subject to public records requests. We also looked for publicly available documents such as syllabi that programs posted online from universities and institutions that did not respond. After that, we began analyzing the documents that we received from programs. This includes reviewing submissions to determine if they are complete, connecting with programs if we have additional questions, as well as reviewing the content of the course materials. In January of this year, we provided deans and department heads with their draft preliminary scores. If programs thought that there were any errors or if they thought that there was missing information, they had until April to provide a response and any additional information. We then provided programs with their final scores in late May. And again, they had a brief amount of time if they had any final corrections to submit at that point before we published findings in early June. And as a result of this process, we were able to include nearly 700 undergraduate and graduate preparation programs from across the country in our teacher prep review sample. And now I'll turn it over to Christie to share what we found.
Thank you, Hannah. So we're going to be moving into our national findings, providing an overview of some of the trends we saw nationally. We do want to note that if you have any specific questions about performance about a specific state, we do encourage you to visit our national findings page or the state profiles to see state-specific data. Based on a review of the 4 instructional approaches, we found only 25% of teacher preparation programs fully address all 5 components of scientifically based reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Even more concerning is that a quarter of programs are not adequately addressing any of the 5 components sufficiently. To be considered adequately addressed, a program has to earn 8 of 12 points for each of those components across the 4 instructional approaches Hannah discussed earlier. When we look specifically at practices running contrary to research, such as miscue analysis, 3Qing, or running records, we have found that around 40% of programs are still teaching multiple practices that run contrary to the research. As we can see here, the most common practices can include guided reading and running records. Teaching these practices can impede the learning of many students, legitimize ineffective methods, and risks confusing aspiring teachers. When we look at the grade performance of programs, programs earn a grade based on the number of components of scientifically based reading instruction that they adequately cover. So programs who earn an A adequately cover all 5 components, and those that earn an A+ have 10 points on average across all the components and 0 evidence of contrary to research-based practices. For each component that is not adequately covered, programs can lose a letter grade. So if you cover 5, you get an A. If you cover 4, you get a B. In addition, if we see 4 or more contrary practices within a program, we do reduce a letter grade by 1. So programs can have 1 or 2 of those contrary practices present, but not have their grade reduced. They have to reach 4. And the same contrary practice can be seen across multiple courses, and that won't have an impact on their grade. Despite the challenges that exist in the current landscape, there are programs serving as great examples from which others can learn. Of the 160 programs that address all 5 components, we've found 48 programs leading the way, which earn an A+ on our standard. Of this, 9 are graduate programs. Exemplary programs exceed the targets for all 5 components, and we do have some highlights on our website under our promising practices section, which can include syllabi from the programs and explanations by the faculty on how they were able to develop strong reading instruction. It's also worth noting that around 38 states have at least one program earning an A or A+ on the standard, so we are seeing it across the nation. Going into specifics on the components, Though all 5 components are critical to developing strong readers, in the past decade of the teacher prep review, we have consistently seen that phonemic awareness is the least addressed component. This time, it is no different. 2 of 3 programs aren't adequately addressing phonemic awareness. When we try to find out where programs are typically falling short, most are not providing enough instructional hours, which means class time, or practice opportunities specific to that component. One program that we wanted to highlight as being ahead of the curve is Southern University and A&M College, which currently includes multiple hours of class time dedicated to phonemic awareness, as well as written assignments and practice opportunities. These snippets, as I said before, are available on our website if you are interested in the syllabi that these programs have constructed to create great reading programs. We highly encourage you to check those out. As I mentioned previously, practice opportunities is another big gap that we see across the nation. Nearly 1/3 of programs aren't providing any practice opportunities connected to the core components of reading, despite widespread agreement among practitioners and researchers on the importance of practice. It seems intuitive. To get better, you have to practice. Often we're seeing that programs are requiring candidates to practice teaching a reading lesson, but they aren't setting specific parameters around the content that they should be teaching within those practice sessions. So for example, they might be asked to engage in a tutoring session throughout the course of a semester, but they're asked to follow what the mentor teacher is doing instead of being asked to practice specific activities learned within a class, such as a phonics skill or how to assess fluency. As a result, many programs might be requiring some practice, but they are not earning credit towards this standard because they are not practicing specific component-related instruction and assessment activities. A program we can highlight that's doing a great job in this area is Lenore Ryan University from North Carolina. They ensure candidates practice specific skills connected to the components, which are covered in their courses. Examples of things that they actually do within their practice sessions is administrating an oral reading fluency exam during tutoring sessions. As Hannah mentioned earlier, it is of paramount importance that teachers are prepared to teach a diverse array of students. So as she mentioned, we also looked at within the standard how well programs are preparing future teachers to teach 3 groups of students: English language learners, struggling readers, and speakers of English language varieties. Despite the clear need, we've found programs are providing very little preparation specific to these 3 populations. 71% of programs aren't dedicating 2 instructional hours to English language learners, and 58% aren't dedicating 2 hours for struggling readers. The third group that we have identified, speakers of English language varieties, is a newer area of research and also awareness. So we were expecting to not see a ton of this currently existing in programs, but we are only seeing around 9% addressing this component at all. In our report, we do provide additional guidance and resources for programs across all 3 of these areas, but with a specifically fleshed out section on resources for speakers of English language varieties, because we highly encourage people who are in this area to peruse some additional resources to see how we can best support this learner group. One school that we wanted to highlight for doing a particularly strong job for one of the learner groups is Winthrop University. They dedicate specific courses to teaching bilingual and English language learning students, including assignments that emphasize the strengths bilingual learners bring to the classroom and creating tasks for candidates to plan and implement lessons using research-supported strategies that specifically target the needs of English learners. Now, when we look at how states are specifically performing, we have seen that states like Mississippi and Colorado have taken a comprehensive approach to improving teacher preparation in their state, including by providing high quality instructional materials, training teachers and teacher educators, and focusing highly on teacher preparation. They've developed robust teacher preparation standards and accountability standards, require strong licensure tests, and offer supports to prep programs. So when we look at states like Colorado and Mississippi on how they're performing in our standard, we're seeing that they have high levels of components addressed within their programs. Colorado, on average, provides 4.6 components across them, and they also have very low number of contrary practices in their programs. They are ensuring that teachers are being prepared to teach research-based practices. These results don't really come as a surprise because there's a lot of investment and attention that have been given in recent years to promoting scientifically based reading instruction, ensuring that there is not just specific standards, but also accountability measures, and making sure that they are also offering support to teacher preparation programs to make the transition to scientifically based reading preparation. If you, as I mentioned before, are interested in how a specific state fared, we do have state profiles available on our website, and we can also link to those in the chat in a second for you to peruse. So if you are interested in finding out how a specific program fares, you can go to www.nctq.org/review and navigate to the Reading Foundation Standard. The first page you will see is an overview of our findings, but we also welcome you to hop into the database. You can see how any program did, as well as a breakdown of how they fared on each of the components. Secondly, if you click the detailed course level findings link on a program score page, you can actually see a spreadsheet that dives super deep into how they fared across all instructional approaches and how well they are covering things within each of their courses. And lastly, I mentioned the state profiles. This link is here, but you'll also find it linked on the top right of the national findings page if you go to the Reading Foundation's page website. And these state profiles will summarize the analysis of teacher preparation programs in your state and each state's reading policies. Okay. We will now move to recommendations. So we're going to talk a little about some actions that we think will be really relevant to this audience to make sure that we can improve the landscape of scientifically based reading instruction in teacher preparation. So when we provide recommendations for school districts, we want to highlight just a few strategies that we think will be particularly important. First, we think it's critical that we train teachers in how to teach reading. We know that it's expensive, and the more that you can hire from programs that have already provided this training, the better. Both where you recruit from and which programs you partner with for student teaching can also signal to programs in your area that they should also be strengthening reading instruction. For teachers who need assistance in being prepared in scientifically based reading instruction right now, some strong professional development programs available include Letters Training, Newhouse Education Center, that's NEUHAUS, Newhouse Education Center, Core Learning, and others. We have in our report a full list of some great professional development opportunities. We can also provide reviews and guidelines and links for where to find them for selecting high quality reading curricula. Okay, and I'm going to pass it back to Hannah.
All right, we just want to share a few examples of other data that's available from the teacher prep review, and then we will open it up for any questions that you have. So as I mentioned, the Reading Foundation Standard is one of several standards with which we evaluate teacher prep programs. We have a set of numerous research-based standards that we look at, so I wanted to share some of the results that I think will be most relevant to school districts. And again, all of this data is available on our websites through the same link that Christie had shared earlier. So the first is elementary mathematics. The elementary mathematics standard went through a similar revision process as the reading standard, gathering input from experts in the field, as well as from through an open comment period. And the standard, which we released in 2022, looks for evidence that programs are devoting sufficient time to math content. So looking for evidence that they spend time on numbers and operations, algebraic thinking, geometry and measurement, data analysis and probability, as well as time devoted to mathematics pedagogy. And as you can see here, about half of undergraduate programs do fairly well, earning an A or a B, but graduate programs fall short on this standard. So given the findings that students' mathematics achievement fell even more than reading during the pandemic, it's worth taking a look at the quality of mathematics instruction when you're recruiting from teacher prep programs. And again, you can look up individual programs ratings on our teacher prep review website. We also look for whether programs are developing a diverse cohort of teachers. The research is clear that all students, and especially students of color, benefit from having teachers of color. But we know that the racial diversity of the teacher workforce has not kept pace with the diversity of the student population. To this end, we look at the diversity of teacher prep programs at the point of enrollment. And with newly available data, we'll soon be able to look at diversity of prep programs at program completion as well. We compare programs' racial diversity against the diversity of their state's teacher workforce and their local community. And we find that about 1 in 5 programs are racially diverse. And again, all of this information is available on our website. So if your district is prioritizing racial diversity, this can help you identify programs that are likely to add to the diversity of your workforce. We also do a lot around clinical practice and student teaching. Many teachers report that student teaching was the most important part of their preparation, and there's a ton of research showing that the importance of pairing student teachers with effective cooperating teachers or mentor teachers. For example, one study found that when someone's student teaches under a highly effective cooperating teacher, when they go on to have a classroom of their own, they're as effective as a 2nd or 3rd year teacher rather than a 1st year teacher. But selecting effective cooperating teachers is where teacher prep programs actually tend to struggle the most. We found that very few programs set requirements for the quality of cooperating teachers, considering either their skill in mentoring adults or their track record of raising student achievement. If programs aren't doing this, there's actually a huge opportunity for school districts to do so when they're identifying teachers eligible to be cooperating teachers. So this is something where if prep programs are falling short, districts actually have a way to step in and improve the quality of preparation for their aspiring teachers. So you can use this data with our ratings to identify strong programs in your area, or you can partner with programs that are stronger in other standards and set your own district guidelines for cooperating teachers. And then any of us who have been a classroom teacher know that classroom management is often the greatest challenge that new teachers face, and poor classroom management can impede even the best planned lessons. In the last teacher prep review, we found that about half of programs require candidates to demonstrate their ability to use most or all key classroom management standards during student teaching. And the one that programs consistently overlook is, ironically, the area that arguably has the most research support, using positive reinforcement. If you're hosting student teachers from programs that are weaker in this area, and again, these ratings are all available on our website, you can work with your cooperating teachers to ensure that they are observing and giving explicit feedback in these core areas. So just to reiterate, the areas of student teaching, clinical practice, and classroom management are ones where prep programs often fall short, but districts, through your use of student teaching experiences, can actually step in and try to fill in some of those gaps, which you unfortunately shouldn't have to, but it is an opportunity that is there. So all of that information is up on our website, freely available. We are always happy to touch base with individual districts. If you want to get a rundown of the quality of programs in your state, we are happy to do so. But now I will take a moment and pause and open it up for any questions that anyone has.
So I do see a first question here, which is how receptive have educator preparation programs been to our work? Have we experienced resistance? And if so, how have we navigated that resistance? So this is a really multifaceted, interesting, great question. So we are proud to say that this year we've had some of the highest level of voluntary participation by educator prep programs. I think we're near 50% of the materials that we had were received via voluntary submission, which is why we had to extend that time frame by quite a lot. It was originally around 1 month. We moved it to 3 months. And the rest were obtained via open records requests, but even those are getting much easier in terms of getting materials from programs. We are also encouraging programs to have one-on-one phone calls with us as much as possible, and provide us with additional materials. So while there is some continued resistance in terms of private program participation, that continues to be a struggle because we don't have that extra step of being able to submit a FOIA request or open records request to them. We are seeing more engagement and especially a lot more conversations with people who are really engaged with scientifically based reading instruction, ensuring that their syllabi reflect their commitment to the work. And I think the biggest part of that is ensuring that we have as open lines of communications as possible. We want to make sure we answer every single email, schedule as many phone calls as possible with programs, and help walk them through the process. And also, we've opened up a lot of the data behind the standards. So that's why we have those spreadsheets and those multi-layered things that on our website that can provide everybody with a really in-depth look about how we're scoring programs. Hannah, do you have anything to add there?
Just on a related note, so Christie mentioned that programs in general are participating much more. Our rate of voluntary submissions has gone up. And programs often, if they have questions, if they have concerns about their ratings, they will reach out. Christie has had many conversations with program leaders about where they are falling short, what they might need to change about their program. And sometimes it's as simple as when they have a practice opportunity, instead of letting candidates teach a lesson about anything they want, setting parameters and saying, no, if you make this lesson specifically about phonemic awareness, it will actually provide much stronger preparation, because then you are ensuring that every candidate in your program has taught a lesson related to phonemic awareness instead of leaving it up to chance. So we are finding that there is a lot more interest from programs with participating, and also we are hearing examples of programs reaching out saying, thanks, we are thinking about revamping our coursework. This is really helpful. We're reviewing this with our faculty to see where we need to make changes for the coming year. So there is some level of resistance, but I think for the most part, the field recognizes that the research basis around scientifically based reading instruction is incredibly strong, and it is helpful to have this outside perspective on their strengths and areas for growth.
Absolutely. And we are launching a survey for educator preparation programs for their feedback on the process. So if you know anybody who gets that link, we welcome them to provide us with their feedback soon. Hannah, this question I think is best for you. So how much influence do states have over programs? And do we see any states with better overall grades among their EPPs as a result?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So we definitely see a relationship. We can't yet say that it is causal, but Christie mentioned both Colorado and Mississippi as examples of states that have set very clear requirements, not only for K-12 schools and what their school should be teaching, but for teacher preparation programs. And they coupled it with accountability measures. So Colorado set new standards for their teacher prep programs, and they also updated their program approval process to allow programs a little bit more time to meet those standards, but also to provide some accountability where if they didn't make progress towards meeting those standards and meet them within a few years, they could conceivably be shut down. Mississippi, I think, is a great example of providing training not only to in-service teachers, but also they provided voluntary training to teacher educators, because there's been research done by other researchers in the field finding that often the people teaching aspiring teachers don't have a firm understanding of scientifically based reading instruction. And so states are recognizing that need and helping to provide some additional instruction. And I think it is incredibly important. We see many, many states setting criteria for what's happening in K-12 schools. I'm sure those of you in school districts are starting to see some of those requirements about curricula and teacher training. But if every year you have a new cohort of teachers coming in who haven't learned this stuff, it's just going to create this ongoing cycle of cost and burden for school districts. So we think it is incredibly important for teacher preparation programs to be part of this movement towards scientifically based rating instruction. And the best way to achieve that is, unfortunately, probably through state requirements and through state accountability measures for teacher prep programs. So we're not relying on the individual programs to do that. We'll actually be releasing an updated scan of state policies in reading in this coming January. So we'll be doing kind of an across the board look at what state policies are in reading, as well as a best practices guide highlighting where we see strong examples across the country.
Thank you, Hannah. And then to talk a little bit more about the teacher prep review more broadly. So the question was, do we measure just one standard per year, and how many standards in total do we look at? What is the overall cycle for review?
Yes.
You want to go on?
No, go for it.
Okay, so it varies by standard. Right now we're on just about a biannual cycle. But essentially the process takes about 2 years, where we do a lot of document collection, and then we do the analysis parts, and then we do the release. And it takes about 1 to 2 years per standards, although there are standards that release much more quickly because we don't need to do as intensive of document collection. The next standard that we are engaging really heavily in is the clinical practice and classroom management standards. A huge part of that will be thinking through what updates we want to make to these standards, what revisions might be necessary, better aligning them to modern research and what the field thinks is critically important in the fields of classroom management and clinical practice. And as part of that, some of the first things you'll hear from us will be when we do a little bit of background research on our end, we will try to make sure that we open up those findings to the field and gather feedback, but that is a little ways away. And then our overall cycle for review, because we do release one standard at a time, is about a 2 to 3 year cycle, although it does vary. Hannah, do you have anything to add there?
Nope, I think that was a good summary.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to pass this question to you. So how long has NCTQ been doing this work in teacher preparation? Has this resulted in longitudinal data? Are things improving overall, declining overall, or is it a mixed bag? And to add on to that, is there any impact of COVID on what we found?
So many good questions. So NCTQ has been around now for 20 years, and we started doing the teacher prep work just a few years into that. We started with a heavier focus on state policy. And our first teacher prep review came out in 2013. At that point, we actually had, I think, 18 different standards that we were evaluating programs on, and we released them all at once. And then we realized that was just too much information to be helpful. So that's when we, after a few years, we scaled back and did 1 or 2 standards at a time. But we have released teacher prep review ratings every couple of years since 2013, so for a decade now. We do have really good longitudinal data. The challenge is that we, especially through major revision processes like what we did with the Reading Foundation standard over the last couple of years, we can't always make an apples to apples comparison between different years of the standard because we do change how we do scoring. But we can look at some kind of key areas of improvement or change. And in general, I would say in teacher prep, we are seeing a mix of some things that are pretty stagnant and some things that are improving. So student teaching and clinical practice is one area that's really stagnated. We have not seen much improvement in the last decade, which is why, as Christie mentioned, we're going to be kind of putting a pause on reevaluating prep programs and are going to do some pretty heavy engagement with the field to kind of better understand where are the challenges that programs and districts and states are running into in building a strong clinical practice program, and where are there success stories that people can learn from? So rather than kind of rating programs on the standard that we've been doing and seeing, again, no real change, how can we help programs and districts better create student and teaching experiences that aligns with what the research says around the importance of effective cooperating teachers? But we do see some areas of improvement. Reading still very far from where we need to be, but we've seen steady improvement over the years in how many programs are addressing scientifically based reading instruction. The numbers, 38% earning an F now is not great, but the numbers used to be much more bleak. So we are seeing definite improvement. And then I mentioned math a little bit ago. We have seen that programs have added the equivalent of about a course, or I think at least half a course in elementary math instruction. So programs are recognizing that aspiring elementary teachers need course time in math, and they are adding more time in that area. So, some persistent trends. Phonemic awareness and reading continues to be the weakest area. In classroom management, positive reinforcement continues to be overlooked, but we're also seeing that there is some trend toward improvement. With COVID, I think that'll be one of the really interesting things to look at with clinical practice, because I think that clinical practice is probably where it was most disrupted during the pandemic. And it'll be interesting to see, have programs made any meaningful changes since then? Are things pretty much the same? We are seeing some changes in terms of district and state policies in response to the pandemic, but so far we're not seeing a ton of evidence in terms of teacher prep programs. I think one of the areas of change that is most apparent is that a lot of states, because of the pandemic, as well as because of concerns around teacher shortages, are shifting their licensure requirements for teachers. So whereas states often used to require licensure tests of the content teachers are expected to teach, many states are offering emergency licenses that don't require that, or they're offering flexibility about how to meet that requirement, or they're dropping the tests altogether, which, if I were a district charged with hiring new teachers, I'd be a little worried about how I'm going to vet the quality of my incoming teachers without that check. I think that's one of the biggest areas of change that we've seen, which is kind of impacting the field more broadly than just teacher preparation.
Okay, and I'm going to round out by the last question, which is what resources exist for teachers or other professionals who want to learn more about how to implement scientifically based reading instruction? We are currently working on a roundup of some available resources that can help target the various components, but there are some things that we highly recommend people check out, including the Florida Center for Reading Resources, the Center on Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, the National Center on Intensive Intervention, and as well as Reading Rockets and Colorin, Colorado, all provide a lot of free, great research aligned materials for implementing scientifically based reading instruction in your classroom. Our website also has a database of instructional materials and textbooks that you can look up any reading based textbook that has been used within a reading course across the country, and we have had a reading expert review that course to see how well it aligns and teaches the various components and how well it aligns with research-based instruction. We also highly encourage people to check out local organizations that are doing advocacy efforts like the Reading League or Decoding Dyslexia. And there are also some great groups for other teachers that you might be able to find online, like on Facebook, about I think it's called the Science of Reading Facebook group. Can be a great way for teachers to connect with one another and provide each other with support. And Hannah, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if anybody would like a customized presentation on their state or wants to follow up with any questions, Christie and I are always available and happy to help. So I've put our email addresses up on the slide, and please feel free to reach out at any point. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And Tim, thank you so much for hosting us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah and Christie. I really appreciate the presentation. Really appreciate the questions and answers. And very informative. Some, as I posted in the chat, some oof moments about some of the the percentages of fail, but you know, I really appreciate that you mentioned that you're making an intentional shift or add-on to not just report the kind of the state of affairs, but offer assistance and support to programs for improvement. Obviously, that's a key component, and that's what we want to see happen. And so I know that that's additional capacity for you, but really appreciate that additional effort. So thank you so much. Incredibly informative. And we, as a reminder, this session was recorded and will be posted on our website very soon. All attendees will be made aware of its when it gets posted, but it will also be there for others to check out in the future. So thanks again, Hannah and Christie. Appreciate you so much, and have a great day, everybody.